Welcome to Resilience with Tasha Schuh. I am so grateful that you're here today because today's episode is called Rebuilding Me, the Fight of Rehabilitation, Part 1, Learning to Survive Rehab. And before we move into the rehab gym, before we talk about physical therapy, depression, or rebuilding my life, I want to zoom out for just a moment because every episode in this series, from the accident to ICU to life growing up, represents something bigger. They represent resilience. And I am passionate about resilience, not because it sounds good, not because it's trendy, not because it fits on a motivational poster. I'm passionate about resilience because I've lived it and I know its power. I've seen what happens when you choose not to give up. I have seen what happens when you choose to keep going, even in the difficulties, the unknown, and the fear of the future. And I've experienced what it looks like to rebuild when everything familiar is gone. And I know with everything in me that resilience is powerful, really powerful. But unfortunately, it's not something that you're born with. It's something you build through the challenges that you face in your own life. And so resilience is really what allowed me to slowly, day by day, rebuild my life into one that I absolutely love. A life I would not change, even knowing what I went through to get here. But it didn't happen overnight. It was forged in seasons like this one. Rehabilitation. I spent 5 months on the rehab unit, 5 months of daily therapy, 5 months of learning how to live in a completely different body, 5 months of physical exhaustion, emotional strain, and redefining what independence would look like. Because if the accident changed my body, rehabilitation tested my spirit. So today I want to take you inside that season, not just to tell you what happened, but to show you why resilience matters so much. Because whether your rebuilding is physical, emotional, relational, or professional, you will face moments where quitting feels easier. And resilience is what keeps you moving forward anyway. So let's move in to that chapter. Now, I still remember the day that I moved from ICU down to the rehab unit. I was wheeled from 8 Mary Bry to 3 Mary Bry at the St. Mary's Hospital in Rochester, Minnesota. And that hallway and elevator ride felt longer than it probably was. By this point, I had spent 3.5 weeks in ICU. And as scary as that season was, I had grown comfortable there. I knew the nurses, I knew their voices, I knew their rhythms, and I had round the clock care, especially when I was at my sickest, and often one on one nursing attention. And I have never been someone who likes change. Most of us don't, but especially me. So even though moving to rehab was technically progress, it felt terrifying. Thankfully, I had already become a regular with Dr. Christofferson, who would become my first rehabilitation doctor, and later my long-term physical medicine doctor after I left the hospital. I had also met some of the rehab nurses while I was still in ICU, and they had come up to introduce themselves ahead of time so that when I arrived on their unit, I wouldn't be so surrounded by complete strangers. That meant more than they probably realized. Still, I was scared. One of my biggest fears was that I wouldn't be monitored as closely as I had been in ICU. In ICU, someone was always right there. And my voice was very quiet at this point. I had been taken off the ventilator, but it was still very weak. And I was terrified that someone would close my door, forget about me, and I wouldn't be able to call out if I couldn't breathe, or that I would not be able to reach the call light with my very limited arm movements and strength. Thankfully, though, they placed me in a room right next to the nurse's station. And that small detail gave me so much comfort. The team had also made a special decision because of the overwhelming support I had received in ICU. My family and friends had filled up the waiting room constantly. There was always someone there. So when I moved to rehab, they gave me the entire room to myself. No roommate. They knew that I would have many, many visitors. And at the time, I didn't realize how unique that was. I did not understand that not everyone has that kind of support, but I was incredibly grateful. My mom was determined to make my hospital room feel like less of a hospital room. And while I was in ICU, I had developed this new obsession with angels. And so many people had given me angel figurines, ornaments, angel cards. And so when I moved to rehab, she decorated my entire room with them. Angels everywhere. And with Christmas approaching, more gifts kept arriving. They filled my room, a visible reminder of the love and support surrounding me. It really became a space that felt so safe, a space that felt supported, a space that felt hopeful. But then came the gym. When I got settled into my room, they asked me if I wanted to go see the therapy gym. And I was excited. If you remember, in my mind, I pictured a workout room, weights, machines, something that looked like I was going to train hard and get strong. I even imagined myself getting buff from my friends. Now, keep in mind, I didn't even have my own wheelchair yet. I was in this red manual hospital wheelchair with a high back. And that was my reality. That was what they pushed me down with to the rehab gym. And I was filled with anticipation. And then we entered therapy mats, rubber balls, parallel bars, a vehicle that had been gutted so patients could practice transfers, very few weights. This was not the workout gym I had imagined. My vision was crushed. I could not believe what I was seeing. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. This was not about me getting buff. This was not going to be about returning to who I had been. This was going to be about learning how to live a completely different way. And it was one of the first moments in rehab where I realized so many of the things that I had envisioned were not going to happen the way I thought they would. Things were going to be different, very different. And if I'm being honest, I wasn't even close to stable when I moved to rehab. I still had my tracheotomy, the tube that was in my neck, and I was now breathing on my own, but I still very much needed the tracheotomy. That's how I was being suctioned, and that's really how they were keeping my airway clear because my lungs were still filled with pockets of fluid from that pneumonia. And so every 30 minutes, they had to suction me through my trach. Every 30 minutes. And even though I was technically progressing enough to leave ICU, my body was still very fragile. Breathing wasn't automatic, it was managed. And layered on top of that, began moving me into a wheelchair regularly. Now, they had started this in ICU, but in rehab, it became routine. And I hated it. All I wanted to do was lie flat in my bed. Being upright made me extremely lightheaded. My blood pressure would drop. I felt dizzy and uncomfortable. And sitting up did not feel empowering. It did not feel like progress. It actually felt awful. But they were determined to build my tolerance. They would say, "You need to stay up longer. You need to get used to this. You need to build endurance." So they stretched the time longer and longer. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I did not have my own wheelchair yet. I was still in that red manual hospital chair with a high back, and it did not feel like independence. It felt medical, it felt temporary, it felt like something I didn't want to accept. And then there were the days. Rehab days were full. They tried to make my therapy schedule start as late as possible, usually around 8 a.m., which meant I had to be up right around 7 a.m. so nurses could begin my morning cares and get me transferred into my chair. Most of my nurses were very kind about it. They would quietly come into the room, turn on the light in the bathroom instead of the big overhead hospital light. They would speak gently. I mean, they understood. I was a 16-year-old who desperately needed sleep. But there was one nurse. She believed I needed to adjust. So she would walk in, flip on that big hospital light, and with a big smile say, "Good morning." That does not go over well with a teenager. We definitely butted heads for a while. I wanted to sleep. She wanted resilience. And at the time, I did not appreciate her approach. I just felt tired and misunderstood. And tired doesn't even begin to describe it. Because it wasn't teenager tired, it was trauma tired. Healing from everything my body had just survived tired. And once the day began, it was structured and intense. 1 hour of occupational therapy, 1 hour of physical therapy, sometimes recreational therapy. And then in the afternoon, another hour of OT, another hour of PT, and even occasionally a visit from a psychologist. Then care conferences with my family and the medical team. But most days were therapy, 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 and all the other things that go with rehab and with lungs filled with pneumonia. Albuterol treatments every 2 hours to break up the fluid in my lungs. When I was in bed, being rolled and repositioned constantly to prevent bed sores, and having vitals taken every 2 hours around the clock. Sleep didn't really exist in long stretches. And then came the bladder complications. I'd always struggled with UTIs before the accident. And so at first, I had a leg bag so that my bladder could continuously drain. But eventually, they decided I would need a cathing team every 6 hours. So the schedule became 5 and 11, 5 a.m., 11 a.m., 5 p.m., 11 p.m. The 5 a.m. one, they usually did in the dark, and I barely woke up. But all of it together, the suctioning, the repositioning, the vitals, the breathing treatments, the cathing schedule, meant I never got a full night's sleep. And I remember sitting in a care conference once, listening to them talk about how tired I always was, and therefore I was not making a lot of progress in my therapy sessions. And finally I spoke up. I was like, well, if you would actually let me sleep, maybe I'd have some more energy. And that comment changed things. They moved the albuterol treatments to every 4 hours and tried to consolidate interruptions so I could get at least 4 hours of sleep at a time. And it helped, but I was still exhausted. But the one small silver lining in the cathing schedule was that it forced me to get back into bed around 11 a.m., which meant I got a break from sitting up. And I certainly did not complain about that because that gave me a couple hours before my 2 p.m. therapy session would start. So I could sleep, eat lunch, and watch my favorite soap opera, Days of Our Lives. That tiny piece of normalcy felt huge. But underneath all of it, there really was something deeper going on. I was afraid of being alone, afraid of my family going home, afraid that once the ICU chaos settled, I would be left in this new body by myself. If the physical exhaustion wasn't enough, there was something even heavier underneath it all. I was terrified of being alone. Even though my family had shown up in ways that were absolutely unbelievable, I carried this quiet fear that eventually they would go back to their lives and I would be left in this new body by myself. My sister stayed the entire time that I was in the ICU, but right before I moved to the rehab unit, she prepared me that she would need to go back home to Sioux Falls. Now, I did not want her to leave. Even back in ICU, I would get upset when she had to step out of the room, even for a shower, even to eat, even to sleep. Because honestly, she was the only one who truly understood me. When I couldn't speak at all, when I had no voice after my body crashed, when I was trying to communicate with my eyes, with tiny expressions, with whatever strength I had left, she just knew. She could read my eyes. She could interpret my expressions. She knew what I was trying to say before I could fully say it. And I was terrified of dying, terrified of not being understood, terrified that if she wasn't there, something would happen and no one would know what I needed. So my expectations of her were completely unrealistic. I wanted her by my side all the time, 24/7. But we all knew that couldn't last forever. She was newly married. Her husband had been incredibly patient with her desire to stay by my side for weeks. And she had already lost 2 jobs because of me. She had just started a new job when I had my accident, and they weren't very understanding. They needed someone in that position, so she lost that job. She took another job right before I got sick with pneumonia, and when I got sick, she refused to leave my side. So she lost that one too. Her dedication and my entire family's dedication meant everything. And when I moved to the rehab unit, someone was going to be sleeping in my hospital room with me every night. Because again, I just was so afraid of being alone, not being able to hit my call light, not being able to get help if I needed it. That would become my new normal. And I knew that eventually that would also come to an end too. My mom at this time really calmed a huge part of those fears because she told me that she would be staying at the Ronald McDonald House, just 2 blocks from the hospital. That meant she wasn't going home. That meant she would be there every single day. She managed the finances and scheduling for our grocery store, and so she could do that work from Rochester. So she made the decision to stay close. And I cannot put into words how much comfort that gave me, knowing she would be there, knowing that if I needed her, she was only 2 blocks away. In a season where so much felt uncertain, that certainty mattered. And here's what's interesting. Even though I was so afraid of being alone, I wasn't. My friends and family constantly reminded me of that. My boyfriend was visiting at least 3 times a week, if not more than that. My friends would come after my therapy sessions ended for the day. They'd walk into my hospital room like nothing had changed. They would sit with me, talk with me, laugh with me. My dad came down. My brother was there. And what I didn't fully understand at the time, but I deeply understand now, is how much my brother was carrying. He was really the one handling the grocery store so that my parents could be in Rochester with me more. He was balancing the store. Also, he was trying to finish up college, managing responsibilities that most people his age weren't carrying yet. And yet he still showed up for me. He still made the drive. He still made me a priority. Looking back, I see how many people were balancing so much behind the scenes. My friends, especially. They were going to school during the day, working their own jobs, managing their own relationships, handling their own responsibilities, and still driving 70 miles one way. And then 70 miles back, often on snowy winter roads, just to spend time with me. Oh, that humbles me now in a way I don't think I fully grasped then. And even after my sister went back to Sioux Falls and started her new job, she still showed up for me in powerful ways. Every morning, she called the nurse's station to see how my night was and how I was doing. Every single night, we talked on the phone. No matter how busy her day had been, no matter how tired she was, and every weekend, she drove 5 hours on Friday to come see me and 5 hours back on Sunday. 5 hours there, 5 hours back. Now, I cherished every single moment that she was in that room with me. I never wanted her to leave. But here's something else I learned during those 5 months. It's a hard lesson. The people I thought would be there weren't. And the people I didn't expect to show up did. And that was a huge lesson, a painful one at times, but also a beautiful one. Because what I will tell you is this: I was never alone. In the entire 5 months that I was in rehab, I only had 2 evenings where I did not have company. 2. That still amazes me. My friend Stevie, my friend Jesse, Travis, my boyfriend, my brother, and so many others. They filled that room with normalcy. And now looking back, I can admit that maybe having visitors almost every single night wasn't always the healthiest. I probably need more rest than I allowed myself. But especially the visits from my friends, those rejuvenated me. They reminded me that I was still me, They reminded me that my world still existed outside those hospital walls, and those visits did something powerful inside of me. They made me want my independence back, as much as that was even possible. They gave me something to fight for. And as much as they gave me something to fight for, there were two other people who became central to my world during those 5 months: my occupational therapist, Barb, and my physical therapist, Neil. Neil had been working on the rehab unit for over 27 years, and he only worked with spinal cord injured patients. So he had seen it all. He was knowledgeable, steady, and confident in a way that made me feel safe, even when I didn't want to feel safe. And as I got to know him, I began to look at him really like a father figure. I knew I could ask him any question. And if he didn't have the answer, he would find it. Barb, on the other hand, was this young, fun loving, cheerful soul who was beginning her career in rehab as an occupational therapist. Where Neil was steady and seasoned, Barb was energetic and warm. These two people would become some of my closest confidants during my time in rehab. And yet, they were hard on me. They pushed me beyond what I thought I could handle. And at times, I hated that. Neil, he spent our therapy sessions stretching out my arms. During the 8 days that I was in a coma, my arms had been bent up against my chest and they had contracted so they would not straighten out. And so every single day he worked on stretching them. And it was extremely painful. He'd tell me, Tasha, there's no way you're going to go through the world with bent arms. So morning and afternoon, he would stretch my arms. Then he would stretch my legs and he would work on strengthening the muscles that I still had. It was relentless. Now, Barb's role looked a little different, especially in the early days. She worked on the small, basic things, trying to help me feed myself, brushing my teeth, brushing my hair, learning how to manage simple tasks that I had never thought twice about before. She also spent many sessions working on the knots in my shoulders and neck. The fear and anxiety that I was carrying showed up physically. I had golf ball sized knots in my shoulders, and they were extremely painful. And she would work patiently, rubbing them out session after session. But again, they pushed me. But they also loved me. And I truly believe that there were moments when they saw me not just as a patient, but as someone they cared deeply about, maybe even like a family member. Now, I'll share more about Barb and Neil in part two, but I do think it's important to understand that before rehab, I didn't even know what an occupational therapist was. I had no idea how crucial both OT and PT would be, not just to my recovery, but to my entire life moving forward. Now, I do have to say that I also had incredible nurses during those weeks and months: Carissa, Lisa, and so many others. And within the first few weeks of rehab, I began getting comfortable with their routines, their personalities, their compassion. They really tried to have me have the same nurses on a regular basis so I could get comfortable with them. And yes, there were a few that gave me some tough love, but overall, I was so grateful for the quality of care that I received. And then there was my first shower. Now, the entire time I was in ICU, I had bed baths. Nurses, they would wash my hair in bed. Marnie was the nurse who washed my hair for the first time after I had gotten sick. It had been 11 days since I had my hair washed. 11 days. Oh my goodness. So long. My head itched constantly. And thankfully, she took the time to wash it. That moment meant more to me than I can describe. I felt human again. So when I moved to the rehab unit and began talking about giving me my first actual shower, I was so excited. And so they had this mesh bed that was strapped onto poles, and they would lay me in it so that they could wash my body and hair safely. So the nurse helping me that day was Renee, and she was so sweet, so kind. And then she took the handheld shower head and sprayed me directly in the face. I thought she was trying to kill me. I was so upset. I came out of that shower furious. And as I complained to my mom, I learned something shocking. Apparently, most people get their face wet in the shower. My sister had taught me how to shower when I was about 4 or 5 years old, and she told me that when I got my face wet, I should have a towel hanging over the shower to wipe my face off. So in my mind, you didn't get your face wet in the shower. Well, that first shower was a shocking experience. And even though it felt good to be clean, I learned some of my quirks. And thankfully, we all giggled about it afterward because Renee, oh, she was such a kind soul. And so I was beginning to learn what it meant to have other people help me do things I had always done for myself. Now, with all the company coming, especially in the beginning, I felt I had a role to play. I tried very hard to be strong. I tried to have a smile on my face. I tried to prove that everything was okay. Because if I looked okay, if I sounded okay, if I acted okay, then maybe it wasn't as bad as it felt. Visitors would walk into my room and I would put on my brave face. I would tell them I was working hard. I would tell them about therapy. I would reassure them. And deep down, I wasn't okay. I even had one visitor, my neighbor, who cried the entire time she sat with me. She was so upset, so heartbroken, so overwhelmed by what had happened. And I found myself counseling her. I was the one telling her it would be okay. I was comforting her. And I remember thinking later, shouldn't this be the other way around? But the thing was I didn't know how to be strong. I was strong during the day, strong for my friends, strong for my family, strong for the nurses, strong for the doctors. But at night, when the lights went out, when the hallway quieted down, when no one was sitting in the chair beside me, that's when I would let myself feel it. That's when I would cry. I would lay there in the dark and pray that I would wake up the next morning and this nightmare would be over. I prayed that somehow this was temporary, that there would be a way back, that I could return to my old life. I didn't want a new life. I wanted my old one. And slowly, without even realizing it, I was starting to feel depressed. I wouldn't have called it that. I didn't even know what depression looked like. I had never experienced it before. But something heavy was settling in. The exhaustion, the fear, the pressure to be strong, the realization this wasn't going away. I was rebuilding physically, but emotionally, I was beginning to unravel. And that's where we'll pick up next time. Because the hardest part of rehabilitation wasn't the therapy gym, it was the fight happening inside my own mind. If this episode resonated with you or you are enjoying hearing my story, I would love for you to subscribe to this podcast and leave a review. It truly helps this message reach more people who may be going through their own struggle or challenge, or who are wanting to learn more about resilience and the power of it. If you want to learn more about my story and the resilience tools that helped me through this time, you can visit tashaschuh.com/coaching. And if you'd like to even go deeper into this part of my journey, my books, My Last Step Backward, and My Next Move Forward share more about what these seasons really looked like. And they are available on Amazon and on my website at tashaschuh.com/shop. So in the next episode, we'll continue this story in Rebuilding Me, the Fight of Rehabilitation, Part 2, Finding Strength in the Routine. Because while I was rebuilding physically, emotionally, things were just beginning to shift in ways that I didn't expect. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.